In today's video, we are going to be taking a close look at a bike that has just raced a round of the EWS. This one belongs to Rich from GMBN. He's just come back from Whistler. And I thought this was a really good opportunity to show you just how gnarly EWS racing can be on bikes. Now, the Enduro World Series is extremely tough on bikes, as we've always said, but Rich as a rider generally isn't that tough on bikes, certainly not when it comes to cross-country racing. You've seen him do a lot of challenges, I'm sure, over on the channel, and he rides the lightest bikes and you won't get any damage on those. Yet you put him on one of these and he turns into a true EWS style racer. When I talk about racing now, I'm talking A to B. You're picking the fastest and the most optimum line through stuff, which usually involves hitting some of the roughest stuff. So this bike is a great showcase here, just to show you the sort of damage you can get, and also what you should be looking for if you go on a big trip in big mountains, the sort of telltale signs of things you might want to replace, or even a preemptive strike before going, what you can do to protect your bike. Normally I would start at the front of the bike and work to the back, but I just noticed that the rear derailleur's got some issues. So perhaps we're going to start down the back here first. Now, no surprise, there's chip marks all over this. A little thing you should know is that this bike was serviced by mechanics just before going away. So it had fresh tyres on it, fresh sealant, new brake pads. I'm not sure if the rotors were new or not, but I'd imagine they probably were. And a general basically a service and a check everywhere. So a full health check, would have had new bottom bracket, all the pivot bolts, etc. would have been torqued up to the correct settings, and generally making sure it's race safe. And then of course Rich rode it on the trip. He also had another bike with him that he was using for video shoots. This one was just his race bike, so it's basically all it's done. Now, even just looking from here, I can see that that mech's out of alignment. The chain looks a little bit baggy as well. So there's a couple of things that have happened here just as a result of the hard riding. Now, it's obviously tagged on some rocks. That's going to happen with a derailleur, especially somewhere where you've got to thread the needle kind of thing through rocky stuff in Whistler. But what I have noticed is the B tension has managed to back itself out. So if you imagine B tension puts tension on the actual jockey cage, you'll see if I just move the cage back, you'll see it takes up the slack in the chain there. And also I can see that it's actually bent slightly. So from one of those strikes, he's bent that derailleur, so his gear shifting could be out slightly. And just another little observation as well is that that clutch feels absolutely horrible. Now, it's obviously a friction damper. You take it off, but even then it doesn't feel particularly good. So I'd be inclined to give this a service. Now, that is quite a particular job, but it's well worth getting a derailleur back to full health again, because although that is slightly twisted, it's not bad. That one will be able to straighten up. Unlike the rear wheel though. Now, this wheel is, I can just see a mile off. This is absolute toast. Now, you've got to bear in mind, this will be no reflection, regardless of the brand, on the wheel strength or anything, because this type of racing, you're really pushing a bike at downhill speeds through some rocky stuff on something that is light enough to pedal all day. And it's not going to be able to keep up with it. Now, you can see, here we go, there's a big crease in the rim here, and there's another crease I spotted earlier on. Another one down here where it looks like the spoke has pulled so hard, where there's probably been an impact to either side here. It's actually stretched the rim there. That's a seriously hard impact, so I reckon that's would have made the wheel egg-shaped. Now, you'll see a lot of EWS racers choosing to use alloy rims, just like Rich does. Now, he uses carbon on a lot of his bikes, but I've noticed that he put the alloy ones on here. So these are the E13 LG ones, and there's good reason for that. If that was a carbon rim subjected to that sort of impact, there's a high chance it would crack. And if that happens in your race run, you're more than likely out of it. But if I just look around this, I mean, look at how loose some of these spokes are. I mean, half of this wheel, let's say half. I mean, there's just no tension left in that wheel at all. And again, this is no reflection on the wheel. I mean, you can move it around side to side. It's wobbling around everywhere. It's kind of quite surprising it's still in one piece, to be honest, and there's no broken spokes. So that will be just a constant repetition of just smacking into big square edge rocks. Now, he's got inserts front and rear, and he's running Enduro spec tyres, so almost downhill style casing tyres. Now, these ones were new before he went away on the trip, The rear one, I've got to say, is in better condition than I thought it would have been. A few of the side knobs are starting to peel away a bit, and you can see on the sort of the trailing edge of the tyre, so if you think it's on the opposite underneath, that's where you can do your braking, on that cutting edge. But other than that, it's not looking too bad. Again, he took this bike there to do that race. He rode the other bike for other stuff. So if he'd have ridden the same bike for 2 weeks in Whistler, these tyres would be fit for the bin pretty much, and that's generally the same with any soft compound tyre. You ride that sort of terrain, that aggressively, where you're on the brakes all the time, certainly the rear one will be done, and you'd have to get a new fresh one for the front and recirculate that front one onto the rear. Good way of doing things to save a bit of money. Now, something people don't often consider is their disc rotors actually wearing down. So the rear pads aren't too bad. They've probably got about half life on them. Front ones, definitely a bit worse, which is quite a surprise actually, given racing somewhere like Whistler, you're going to be running that back brake quite a lot because elevation is such that you kind of need to be on the brakes a lot. But measuring his disc rotor on the rear, it's actually fairly worn. Now, it does look in really good condition, so I'm pretty sure that this was a new rotor along with the pads before he went. But here's the thing, disc rotors, I mean, at least these ones are 1.85 millimeters thick as standard. This will vary across brands. And the Shimano ones will say on the minimum thickness when you replace them is 1.5. Now, after basically a couple of big days out on a bike, he's down to like 167, 168. Kind of, it's hard to tell because it's going to vary very slightly, but like under 1.7. In that amount of time. Now, the reason this is so crucial is you get different disc rotor designs. These particular ones, it's like a sandwich construction. So you've got alloy on the middle there to pull the heat away from the braking surface, and then the braking surfaces are made of steel, and they're all pressed together like a sandwich. If you wear that steel out, you're going to hit the alloy, and then the whole thing is just going to distort completely and not work. Not a good place to be. So get yourself a set of digital calipers or verniers and measure your disc rotors from time to time. If you ride in really wet conditions or you use your brakes a lot, you might be quite shocked at how thin your rotors can get. Now, something else I've noticed just by having the rear wheel out the frame, obviously there's no tension left in that wheel because he's absolutely smashed it to bits. Now, what that means basically is flex in the actual wheel, and there's rubber marks on both seat stays, like quite a lot as well, and also in the chain stay. So that wheel has been buzzing completely, like almost two-wheel steering in the back of the bike there, which suggests that he smashed the bike so hard at one of the stages, and it was maybe halfway down, and he just kept on hammering. Again, that's like such a racer mentality, whereas the weekend warrior sort of attitude would be to stop and sort of make sure your bike doesn't get any worse. The point is, big mountain riding is really quite gnarly on your bike, so make sure you check this sort of stuff because it could get quite costly. Certainly in Rich's case, that's a new rim on the back, no doubt about it, and there'll be new spokes as well to get that laced up. The thing with any sort of enduro racing is you're going to be pedaling through rough terrain. Now, you see a lot of racers choosing to use shorter cranks these days, basically reduce their bottom bracket strikes and crank strikes as they're going through terrain. The bottom of his cranks here is absolutely smashed to pieces. I can't tell if he had rubber boots on here, I'm guessing not, but a lot of carbon cranks come with rubber boots on the end. For the specific reason, you're going to ground out at some point. But you can see the scarring on the edge of these cranks here, really quite bad on both of them. And he's also got a tacho style chain guide. So this is a nuke-proof chain guide. I think he had that fitted just before the trip because I haven't seen him use a chain guide before. So I guess he just wanted the additional security that you get over using a narrow wide system. Now, he rides right foot forwards, which makes sense because you've got two teeth here that have been just clouted on rocks. This has nothing to do with the tooth profile. There's two, in fact, there's three here with lots of damage on them. And there's some severe scarring to the actual tacho style chain guide there. Now, Rich did tell me that he managed to sort of sump the bike out on many things, but it kind of goes with racing, doesn't it? So you're going to get some damage. Now, if you're going abroad and you're going to be riding sort of big mountain terrain, I can't recommend these sort of type chain guides enough. Now, if he didn't have this, he probably would have bent the chainring. That would have been out of the race. And also out of pocket, you've got to buy another chainring. At least with this one, he can carry on his rest of his trip. Okay, now next up is doing a bolt check of the bike. Now, really, you should be doing this after every major ride anyway, especially so when your bike looks like this. Now, for a trip like Whistler, as I said, his bike was prepared by a mechanic beforehand. Everything would have been done with a torque wrench, and every little detail on the bike has been done. But there's definitely some play in the back end. So I've just checked the back here, that's fine. Main pivot appears to be fine. I can feel some movement in the shock. So there's a few things that could be here. It could be the shock bushings, which is fairly likely, and it could be the mounting hardware. Now, just checking some of these bolts, they're not completely loose, but that's not completely tight either. So this one actually has a torque setting on it. It says 10 Newton meters. So I've got a torque wrench here, and I'm just gonna get to the correct setting, and just to show you how loose this is. There we go. So that was what, like 2 turns basically to get that to correct torque setting. Now, if you're finding on your bike some of the bolts are unwinding, you might need to use thread lock on them, or there might be a problem elsewhere on the bike. If something is bent or there's an issue somewhere else, it can often lead to a bolt coming loose. So just have a bit of a sense check there. Okay, so front wheel out, pretty much a repeat of the back, not quite so bad though. So there are a couple of loose spokes, nothing too worried. So this one is fully recoverable. I haven't seen any dings on the rim on this one, but I would still be tempted to remove the tyre and just check for sure. Now you've also got to bear in mind as well that running in hot conditions, tyre sealant can dry up a bit quicker than it can in cooler conditions, and it was seriously warm when Rich was out at the EWS. So we'll be checking that. Now I do notice that there is a spoke here that's gone a little bit wavy. That one's quite bent. It's not loose though. Tension is good on the wheel. Disc rotor though, like the rear one, 1.65. Check it in a few places for consistency. 1.63. The safety point is 1.5. So it's a thing to monitor. But the point is, I don't know a single person that actually checks that. So get yourself a set of those. Might be a bit of a safety one for you. Now, onto the front fork. Now, of all the suspension on your bike, the fork has got the toughest job of them all, because that just deals with the direct hits constantly. It deals with the nasty impacts when you're landing to flat at weird angles. It deals with the flex front and rear. So keep an eye out when you're riding for any awkward noises. Now, if you're getting any sort of cracking noises, there are a few things it could be. It could be hopefully as simple as either your disc rotor being loose or the actual caliper being loose on the fork. Worst case scenario though, it could be something like a loose steerer tube. Now, Rich hasn't complained of any damage to this fork, although he did say it was leaking oil and the fork wasn't feeling as good as it should do. Now, I notice, even looking in the light here, there's a big score mark down the side of the fork here. Now, it's not gouged all the way through that Kashima coating, but it's enough that I can like run my nail over it and really feel that. Now, what that will be doing is allowing not only moisture to get into the seal, but it's going to allow the moisture that's on the inside to come out, which is what he's been talking about. So the oil that's in that lower leg, through a sort of a capillary action as the fork is sort of telescoping through its travel, that oil is going to be coming out, which means there's going to be less oil on the inside doing its job to lubricate it. So this fork will for sure need a service now. Now, this is a bit of a tricky one because of the fact it's not like the sort of bad sort of scuffs and scratches you see on stanchions that you have to do repairs on. I don't think there's too much you can actually do with this one. Now, if you have a nick that's taken out of the stanchion on your fork and it's gone through the actual external coating, so if you've got RockShox fork and you can see like a silver alloy through it, and the same if you've got Kashima fork, if you can see the silver alloy past that coating, you're going to need some sort of repair job. Now, the most important thing you can do is to remove any burrs that are on there. So if you've got like a bit of metal flaked off like a burr, it's going to damage the seal, and then it's basically the floodgates open for letting stuff in and further damaging your fork. The key with any suspension fork working well is keeping it lubricated and keeping it clean. Okay, now obviously, if this was my bike, I would have cleaned it beforehand before doing this. I wanted to accentuate the dust and stuff on Rich's bike. But when you're cleaning your bike, it's the prime opportunity to get to know all those nooks and crannies and start figuring out if there's any damage. Now, I can see what I couldn't see earlier on the underside of the bottom bracket shell, there's 3 massive chips of paint completely missing there. Now, although there doesn't look to be any sort of structural damage it's definitely something to keep an eye on. So every time Rich washes this bike, I would say to him, flip it upside down and have a look at that. And the same goes for all these nooks and crannies around where the shock is mounted. There's so many little shapes here that could distort your vision, essentially hiding a crack if there was ever going to be one. Now, I've seen nothing on here other than damage cosmetically from flying rocks. Now, you probably notice he's got a huge sort of built-in rubber and plastic protector here. There's a few slices out of this where it's done its job. Now, if your bike doesn't have anything like this, this is a really good position to put protection on your frame. I would also be having some heli tape or some sort of down tube protection as well. In Rich's case, I'm quite surprised that there's no damage here, to be honest, given the state of the back end on it. A few little cosmetic chips on the back, but really, by all accounts, not too bad, which just goes along with my point that enduro bikes are some of the toughest bikes out there. This one has successfully survived an EWS round under Rich Payne, and it's, to be fair, it's had a long paper round before then. So he needs a new rear wheel on the bike and a few new bits and pieces, but nothing too bad. This one will be fit to race another day pretty soon. But my point is, when you do big activities on your bike, you should be checking them before and after. Don't just rely on the fact that your bike feels all right and it's going to be okay. It's up to you to check them, but I'm pretty impressed at how little damage there actually is after someone of Rich's calibre smashing his way through an EWS. Now, let us know what you think of that recent round of the EWS out of Whistler as well. Hopefully this video has been helpful for you. Make sure you follow Rich's antics over on GMBN as well. Really, really good watching. He's actually one of my favourite presenters right now. Again, let us know what you think in the comments underneath, and we'll see you in another video soon.